So I've had both of these cameras for a while now, the Lumix S5IIX and the Lumix GH5, and I wanted to make this video as a way to help anyone who is struggling with figuring out which direction they should go as far as camera and lens mount system. Arguably, these two cameras that I'm talking about were the best cameras of their respected time. The GH5 swept the industry back in 2017, offering a bunch of amazing features, and the Lumix S5IIX has been a camera that a lot of people have been switching to in 2024 and even now in 2025. So I'm not going to go too in depth about all of the differences between these two cameras because there is a lot of differences and a lot of similarities, but I do just want to show you some practical examples of images that I've shot with both of these cameras and then just kind of talk you through my mindset on the S5IIX versus the GH5 because honestly, I love them both. Both these cameras shoot in a variation of Vlog. You have full Vlog on the Lumix S5IIX and then Vlog Lite on the Lumix GH5. Both of these color profiles are really easy to grade. If you have a plugin like Cinematch or if you use a color space transform on DaVinci, you can pretty easily change Vlog L into something like full Vlog and then just use the same LUTs on both cameras. So quick side note, Cinematch is one of my favorite plugins, and what's cool is that it actually matches color profiles on the sensor level, which really helps out a lot. This isn't a sponsored video, but there is a special link in the description below if you'd like to pick it up at a discount. So I would definitely say check that out if you're trying to match a bunch of different cameras, or if you just want to switch one color profile into a different color profile. I did this a lot when I used my Olympus cameras. I would just switch it into S-Log3, and then I could use a bunch of S-Log3 LUTs on my Olympus footage. So both of these cameras have amazing IBIS, which makes handheld footage and just moving the camera a lot smoother. But if I was going to give an edge to one of them, I would definitely say the GH5 I think looks a little bit better. One, because the IBIS is just going to work better on a micro four thirds camera than it will on a full frame because there's a smaller sensor and it can move around more freely. And two, because the readout speed on the GH5 is faster than on the S5IIX. You have a 13 millisecond readout speed on the GH5 and a 22 millisecond readout speed in full frame mode on the S5IIX. So moving the camera just looks better on a GH5 in my opinion. Now I'm jumping my gun a little bit here on the differences, but I did want to point out that the base ISO on the S5IIX is 640 on the low end, but the S5IIX does have a dual native ISO. So while it's 640 on the low end, it can go up to 4000 on the high end and you'll still get a clean image on 4000. With the GH5, it is a base ISO of 400. So that's better in bright situations. You won't have to use as much ND, but there is no dual native ISO on this camera. So low light on the GH5 is definitely something that you're going to struggle with. I typically don't try to push this past ISO 800 if I don't have to. As far as optics, I definitely think that both of these camera bodies look professional in my opinion. There's no weird colors on either of these bodies. The GH5 is pretty much all matted out black with just a couple of white logos in the front, and the S5IIX is also matted black. There is no color on it at all, which I really like. So you have open gate shooting on both of these cameras. The S5IIX will shoot in a 3.2 aspect ratio, whereas the GH5 will be a 4:3, and that's just due to the different sensor shapes that these cameras have. You have a bunch of different frame rate options on both cameras, and both of these cameras have amazing battery life. So again, I'm going to jump the gun a little bit and just talk a little bit about some of the differences with the different crop factors. With the S5IIX, you will get a crop when you go to 4K 60, but that crop is only going to be a 1.5 crop from full frame. So it's still going to be a bigger sensor area than the GH5, but the GH5 does have uncropped 4K 60. The only caveat is that it's in 8-bit. So it's not cropped, but you don't have as good a color fidelity in the GH5. Now, there is a lot of differences here. There is a 6-year gap between these two cameras, and a lot happens in the camera industry in that amount of time. One of the most glaringly obvious differences is the lens mount and the sensor size. The Lumix S5IIX is a full frame sensor. The Panasonic GH5 is a micro four thirds sensor. So this sensor is about 2 times smaller than the one on the S5IIX. So that's going to mean the full frame sensor is going to let in a lot more light. Shallow depth of field is going to be more easily achieved, and the potential for better dynamic range is going to be higher on the S5IIX than it will be on the GH5. Now, although the L mount is still kind of new, we are getting a lot more lenses and seeing that whole system be a lot more filled out. But even so, the Micro Four Thirds system has been around for a while, and there is a multitude of Micro Four Thirds lenses available. And there's a lot of used, third-party, and just inexpensive options for that lens mount. I feel like oftentimes we hyperfixate on the body that we want, but we kind of neglect the fact that we're gonna have to actually build out a lens kit for the system as well. And although the lenses for full frame L mount that have autofocus are gonna be on average more expensive than a Micro Four Thirds lens, even when you're talking about kit lenses, you can invest in some vintage lenses for full frame cameras for really cheap. And again, those vintage lenses were designed for 35mm film, which is essentially the same as full frame. So you won't have to do any speed boosting. You can put a 35mm vintage film lens on an S5IIX and you'll get full use out of the lens, which I think is pretty cool because you can build out an entire vintage lens kit for very little money. Another big difference is going to be the price. You can't buy the GH5 new anymore. So in the used market, you can get that camera for around $500 to $700 depending on the condition and what's bundled with it. Whereas the S5IIX, when it was released, I think it was $2,000. Now it's kind of hovering around the $1,700 price range, and I expect it to go down even more in the used market once the new S1R and S1H Mark II cameras come to market. Another glaring difference is going to be autofocus. The S5IIX has pretty good continuous autofocus, very reliable. It's the phase detect system, whereas the Lumix GH5, again in 2017, Lumix was not focused on their autofocus game, so you can't really rely on continuous autofocus on this camera. Dynamic range is something that's obviously going to be a little better on the S5IIX. I think the S5IIX is rated at like 13 stops of dynamic range, whereas the GH5 is somewhere around 11 or 12. So that might not seem like that big of a difference, but you can definitely see it when you're trying to push and pull from the files. And there's a lot of different ways that you can record into the S5IIX as opposed to the GH5. You can not only record out to an Atomos Ninja V using HDMI, and you can do the same thing with the GH5. The S5IIX also adds the option to record into an SSD, which is pretty nice. So overall, I am pretty partial to the GH5. I love how it feels in my hand, and the fact that I can get it to look pretty close to the S5IIX for a third of the price makes it really easy for me to recommend to people even now. But it can't be ignored that the Lumix S5IIX is a professional workhorse, and it'll create an image that is absolutely timeless. Chances are you won't really need a better image than what the Lumix S5IIX can give you for years to come. But there really isn't any easy answer when it comes to which camera you should get. If you're on a tight budget, you can put together a really powerful camera package with the GH5. You could probably buy the camera body, a nice lens, and a microphone for the price of an X5IIX body alone. But if you know that you want the full frame look, good autofocus, amazing IBIS, and a bunch of different codecs that you can choose from, you really can't beat the Lumix S5 II or the S5IIX for the price. So this video right here is one that I did on some of my favorite features of the GH5, and this one over here is one that I did recently about the Lumix S5IIX after a year. So you can check those out if you want a little more info on both of these cameras. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.